still remember the day my doctor leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and gave me that look. You know the one, half concern, half hesitation, like he was about to deliver a piece of news that could change everything. He said my blood sugar levels were climbing dangerously high. "If you keep going down this road," he warned, "you're heading straight into type 2 diabetes, and once you're there, it's very hard to turn back." My heart sank. For a moment, it felt like the room grew smaller. I couldn't hear the ticking of the clock anymore. All I could hear was the pounding inside my chest. It wasn't just about me. It was about my family, about my grandchildren, who loved running into my arms after school, about my daughter, who always checked in to make sure I was eating right, about the life I still wanted to live. And now, it seemed like my body was betraying me. I tried to smile, to act like I wasn't shaken, but inside I felt embarrassed, scared, confused. The word diabetes carried so much weight. It wasn't just about needles or medications. It was about losing control of my health, my independence, my future. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the glass of water in front of me. Even water tasted bitter when your heart is heavy. I kept thinking, how did I get here? I wasn't lazy, I wasn't careless. But life had a way of sneaking up on me. A little too much bread here, a skipped walk there, stress that made me grab something sweet to cope. And now I was paying the price. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned, my mind circling around the same questions. Would I have to inject insulin? Would I lose my eyesight? Would I be able to watch my grandkids grow up? The fear wasn't just medical, it was emotional. It was spiritual. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a future I didn't want to face. And I know I'm not the only one. Have you ever had a doctor say something to you that made your stomach drop? That made you question if life would ever be the same? That night, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for a miracle, not for something impossible, just for a chance to find a way back to myself. What I didn't know then was that this terrifying moment, this diagnosis that felt like a curse, would actually become the beginning of something I never expected. But at that time, all I felt was fear. The weeks after that doctor's visit felt heavier than I could have imagined. Every morning started with the same routine. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, rub my temples, and gather the strength just to stand up. My body felt sluggish, as if I was walking through mud. The thirst never went away. No matter how much water I drank, my mouth was dry, my throat parched. Sometimes I'd wake up 3-4 times a night, stumbling half asleep toward the kitchen sink. The lack of sleep only made the days worse. And the hunger, it was strange. I could eat a full plate of food and still feel unsatisfied, almost hollow, like my body was begging for something it wasn't getting. But the worst part wasn't the physical symptoms. It was the way they started stealing little pieces of my life. I used to take my grandson, Noah, to the park every Saturday. He'd race ahead, his laughter echoing as he climbed the jungle gym. But soon I found myself sitting on the bench instead of running after him. My knees ached. My breath gave out too quickly. He'd look back at me, puzzled. "Grandpa, why don't you come play?" And all I could do was force a smile and say, "Maybe next time, buddy." Next time never seemed to come. I started forgetting small things, where I'd put my glasses, the name of a neighbor I'd known for years, even whether I'd taken my evening pills. My daughter noticed. She began leaving sticky notes around the kitchen. "Don't forget your meds, Dad. Doctor's appointment Thursday." It was her way of helping, but to me it felt like another reminder of how much I was slipping. The isolation crept in quietly. Friends would invite me for a walk or a game of cards, but I'd find excuses. "I'm tired today. Maybe next week." Truth was, I didn't want them to see me like this. Slower, weaker, distracted. I remember one evening in particular. We were all gathered for dinner. My daughter, her husband, my 2 grandkids. Everyone was laughing, passing plates around, sharing stories. And there I was, sitting at the table, staring at my food. barely able to follow the conversation. It was as if I was there, but not really there. I caught my daughter watching me across the table. Her eyes said what she didn't want to say out loud. "Dad, I'm worried about you." And that cut deeper than any diagnosis, because I wasn't just losing my health, I was losing myself. I kept thinking, is this what the rest of my life will look like? Days filled with fatigue, nights broken by thirst, a slow fading away from the people I loved most. It was like watching the world move forward while I stood still, stuck in a body that no longer obeyed me. Sometimes I'd sit in my recliner staring at the TV without really watching. Hours passed like minutes, and I couldn't shake the thought. This isn't me. This isn't the life I wanted. And maybe you've felt that too. Like you're present, but not truly living. Like your health has become a shadow that follows you everywhere. It was in those quiet, lonely moments that the weight of it all pressed hardest on me. The shame, the fatigue, the fear, and yet, deep inside, a small voice whispered, "It doesn't have to stay this way." But at that point, I didn't believe it. Not yet. There comes a moment when the weight of it all becomes too much to carry. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was getting dressed, moving slowly, my body stiff from another restless night. I bent down to pull on my socks and froze. The simple act of bending, of trying to slip the fabric over my heel, sent a sharp pain shooting through my back. My hands trembled, my breath grew shallow, and in that instant something inside me cracked. I sat there, half-dressed, staring at my own feet, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't even put on my socks. It sounds small, doesn't it? Such a simple thing. But when you lose the ability to handle life's little tasks, it feels like the world is slipping away piece by piece. I lowered my face into my hands, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself cry, silent, heavy tears that I didn't want anyone to see. Because what would I say? That I couldn't dress myself? That I felt like a burden to the people I loved? That I was terrified of the future? I thought of my daughter, always so strong, carrying the weight of her own family. The last thing I wanted was for her to carry me too. And I thought of Noah. How could I explain to him why Grandpa couldn't play anymore? Why Grandpa always sat on the sidelines? That morning, staring at my socks, I whispered the words I'd been afraid to say out loud. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the beginning of the end. It wasn't just the pain in my back. It wasn't just the exhaustion or the thirst or the foggy memory. It was the crushing thought that I was disappearing, little by little, day by day. I felt ashamed. Ashamed to ask for help. Ashamed to admit that I wasn't strong enough. And in that moment, a darker thought crept in. What if this is all that's left? What if I never get better? It's strange how the mind works when you feel trapped. Every small defeat becomes a mountain. Every ordinary struggle feels like proof that you're on a downward path you can't escape. That morning was my rock bottom, my breaking point. I wish I could tell you I stood up right then and decided to change everything. But the truth is, I didn't. I sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of my own body, feeling older than my years, wondering if the best days of my life were already behind me. Maybe you've been there too. That moment when you want to fight, but the fight feels too big. That moment when you ask yourself, what's the point? Looking back, I realized that was the day I almost gave up. But sometimes the lowest point is where the turning point begins. I didn't know it yet, but something, or rather someone, was about to enter my life with a piece of advice so simple, so unexpected, that it would change everything. At the time, I couldn't imagine it. But in the silence of that morning, I had reached the end of myself, and the beginning of something new. It's funny how life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. For me, the turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had dragged myself to the small community center down the street. They were holding a potluck after the morning service, and my daughter insisted I go. "Dad, you need to be around people," she said. Honestly, I didn't feel like it. But I went anyway, mostly to make her happy. I sat at one of the long tables pushing food around on my plate when an old friend, Clara, slid into the chair beside me. Clara was the kind of woman who noticed everything. She looked at me for just a second before tilting her head. "You don't look like yourself," she said softly. I gave the same answer I'd given 100 times before. "Just tired." But she wasn't convinced. "No, it's more than that. What's going on?" Something in her voice, gentle, not prying, made me open up. I told her about my blood sugar, about the doctor's warning, about the way I felt like my body was slipping away from me. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally fell silent, she leaned closer and said something that caught me completely off guard. "Have you ever tried black sesame oil?" I blinked at her. "Sesame oil? Like for cooking?" She smiled. "Yes, but the black kind. It's been used for centuries in traditional medicine. My grandmother swore by it. A teaspoon a day. It helped balance her blood sugar, gave her energy, even helped her sleep." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Clara, I can barely keep track of my pills and you want me to add some oil to the mix?" But she didn't back down. "I'm not saying it's magic, but sometimes the simplest things make the biggest difference. It's natural, it's safe, and it just might help." Her words stuck with me. Not because I believed them right away, but because they carried a kind of hope I hadn't felt in months. That night, as I sat in my recliner, I kept thinking about what she said. Black sesame oil. It sounded too simple, too ordinary. And yet, maybe that was exactly why it could work. After all, I had tried medications, diet plans, endless warnings from doctors. None of it seemed to give me back my energy, my strength, my sense of self. Could something so small, so humble, really make a difference? I found myself whispering out loud, "What do I have to lose?" The next day, I stopped by a small health food store. The shelves were lined with bottles I didn't recognize. Teas, tinctures, powders. And there it was, a dark glass bottle labeled cold-pressed black sesame oil. I picked it up, turning it in my hands. The liquid inside shimmered, almost like it held a secret. The clerk noticed me staring. "That's good stuff," she said. "Old remedy. A lot of people use it for energy, memory, even blood sugar." I couldn't help but smile. Twice in 2 days, the same message. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe it was something more. That evening, I unscrewed the cap, poured a teaspoon, and hesitated. The smell was nutty, earthy, not unpleasant, just different. I closed my eyes, whispered a quick prayer, and swallowed. It wasn't dramatic. No instant miracle. No sudden burst of energy. Just a quiet beginning. But something inside me shifted, not in my body, but in my spirit. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking a step forward instead of backward. And sometimes that's all you need. One small step to start a new journey. The first few days, I'll admit, I wasn't expecting much. Every morning, I poured a single teaspoon of that black sesame oil, let it rest on my tongue for a moment, then swallowed it with a glass of water. It became a small ritual, quiet and personal, almost like a prayer. At first, I wondered if I was just fooling myself. Maybe it was nothing more than a habit like taking another pill, but then, little things began to shift. The first thing I noticed was my mornings. Normally, I'd wake up groggy, moving like an old machine that needed oiling. But about a week in, I woke before my alarm. My body still felt heavy, but my mind wasn't trapped in that same fog. I actually wanted to get out of bed. It sounds small, doesn't it? But after months of dragging myself through each day, that tiny spark of energy felt like a gift. A few days later, something else happened. My daughter came by in the evening. We sat at the kitchen table and she leaned back, studying me the way only a daughter can. "Dad," she said slowly, "you look different." "Different how?" I asked, half defensive. She smiled. "Lighter. Like there's more life in your eyes. What's going on?" I shrugged, trying to hide the truth. But inside, I felt a flicker of pride. Because maybe, just maybe, something was happening. The cravings started to change, too. I didn't reach for the cookies on the counter as often. I found myself actually wanting fresh fruit. Apples tasted sweeter. Water felt more refreshing. It was as if my body was waking up, remembering what it truly needed. And the thirst, the endless, unbearable thirst, began to ease. I still drank plenty of water, but I wasn't waking up 5 times a night anymore. For the first time in months, I slept through until morning. One afternoon, I took Noah to the park again. At first, I stayed on the bench, just like before. But when he begged me to chase him, I stood up. My knees still ached, but I managed a slow jog across the grass. His laughter filled the air as he darted ahead of me, looking back in surprise when he realized I was actually following. When we collapsed on the grass, both out of breath, he looked at me with those wide eyes. "Grandpa, you're faster than last time." I laughed, a deep laugh I hadn't heard from myself in a long while. It wasn't speed, it was spirit, and he could see it. I didn't want to get carried away. I told myself it was too soon to believe. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. And then came the moment that still brings tears to my eyes. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting with my Bible reading when I suddenly realized I remembered exactly where I had left my reading glasses. No searching, no frustration, no sticky notes to remind me. It was such a small victory, almost laughable. But I sat there holding those glasses, whispering to myself, "Something is changing. I can feel it." I kept it to myself at first, afraid it would vanish if I said it out loud. But as the weeks passed, the changes added up. A little more energy, a little less pain, a little more clarity. And the phrase that kept echoing in my mind was this: it was just 1 teaspoon a day, but something inside me was waking up. I'm not a scientist, and I never pretended to be. But once I started noticing those small changes, I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why was this tiny spoonful of oil making such a difference? So, I did what anyone would do. I started asking questions. I talked to my doctor. I searched for studies. And what I found amazed me. It turns out black sesame seeds are more than just a cooking ingredient. They're packed with compounds that researchers have been studying for years. One of them is something called sesame, a natural antioxidant. Scientists at universities in Japan have been looking at sesame for its ability to support healthy blood sugar levels. It helps the body use insulin more effectively, so sugar doesn't just build up in the bloodstream. In simple terms, it helps your body burn the fuel instead of letting it pile up. There's also magnesium, which is abundant in sesame seeds. Studies from Harvard show that people who get enough magnesium in their diet tend to have healthier blood sugar levels. Magnesium works like a tiny helper, supporting hundreds of reactions inside your body, including the way your cells respond to insulin. And then, there are the healthy fats, the kind that nourish your brain, your heart, and even your joints. These fats slow down the absorption of sugar in your bloodstream, which helps prevent those sudden spikes and crashes that leave you exhausted. I read about a study published by the National Institutes of Health that looked at older adults who included sesame seeds in their diet. The results? Better blood sugar control, improved cholesterol, and even sharper memory. It wasn't magic, it was nutrition, real, natural, and tested. The more I learned, the more it made sense. For months, my body had been starved of what it truly needed. Processed foods, stress, late nights, they had drained me. And here was this little seed rich with minerals, antioxidants, and healthy oils, giving my body the tools to repair itself. I remember sitting with my doctor a few weeks later, nervous about my test results. When he read the numbers, he paused, looked at me, and then looked again. "Your blood sugar has dropped," he said slowly. "Not just a little, significantly." I smiled, but I didn't brag. I just nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Because now I understood. It wasn't a miracle pill. It wasn't some secret cure. It was nature working the way it was designed to. And maybe the best part was this. It reminded me that healing doesn't always come from something complicated. Sometimes the answers are simple, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to notice. That's what gave me hope. If one small change could do this, what else could I improve? And that's when I decided I wasn't stopping here. If black sesame oil could help, then maybe building a new routine could change everything. Once I saw the numbers start to change, and once I felt the difference in my body, I knew I couldn't stop there. If one small choice had already made such an impact, what would happen if I built on it? So I began crafting a new routine. Nothing drastic, nothing overwhelming. Just small adjustments, one by one, that slowly began to weave themselves into my everyday life. Each morning, after brushing my teeth, I'd pour that teaspoon of black sesame oil into a small glass. Sometimes I mixed it with a spoonful of yogurt. Other days I drizzled it over my oatmeal. It became as natural as tying my shoes. But I didn't stop there. I started walking again. At first it was just 10 minutes around the block. My legs ached, and my breath was short, but I reminded myself, it wasn't about speed. It was about consistency, step after step, day after day. Soon, 10 minutes became 15, then 20. Eventually, I found myself walking in the park with Noah again, watching the ducks paddle in the pond, feeling the sun on my face. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was fighting my body. I felt like I was working with it. I also made small changes to the way I ate. Nothing extreme. I didn't cut out entire food groups or follow some complicated plan. Instead, I swapped little things. White bread for whole grain, soda for water, dessert once a week instead of every night. And you know what surprised me most? My body started to want those healthier choices. Fruit tasted sweeter. Vegetables had more flavor. My cravings began to shift, almost like my body was saying, "Thank you. This is what I needed all along." Sleep, too, became a priority. Instead of falling asleep in front of the television, I created a simple ritual. A warm cup of chamomile tea, a short prayer of gratitude. Lights out at the same time every night. Slowly, my nights grew deeper, more restful. It wasn't perfect. There were days I felt tired, days I slipped back into old habits, days I doubted whether it was even worth it. But each time, I reminded myself of something simple. The sum of small choices makes a big difference, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. My daughter stopped leaving sticky notes everywhere. She trusted me to remember my appointments again. My grandson started asking me to play chase more often. Even my doctor, usually so serious, cracked a smile during my last visit. "Whatever you're doing," he said, tapping his pen on the desk, "keep doing it." It wasn't just about lower blood sugar. It was about life returning to me. Energy, laughter, presence. And it all began with 1 teaspoon of oil, which grew into a walk, which turned into better food, which gave me deeper sleep. One choice leading to another, like stepping stones across a river I once thought I could never cross. Looking back, I realized the power wasn't in the oil alone. It was in the decision. The decision not to give up. The decision to believe that it wasn't too late to change. Because that's the truth. It's never too late. It's strange how when you're living through change, you don't always notice it day by day. But one morning I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I almost didn't recognize myself. My face looked brighter, my eyes clearer. The heaviness that once sat on my shoulders had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something I hadn't felt in years. The numbers told part of the story. My blood sugar had dropped not just once, but consistently over the months. My cholesterol improved. Even my blood pressure, which had been creeping up for years, found its way back down. But the real results weren't in the numbers. They were in the moments. Like the Saturday afternoon I played catch with Noah in the yard. We tossed the ball back and forth until the sun slipped behind the trees. When I finally sat down, laughing and out of breath, he ran up, threw his arms around me and said, "Grandpa, you're fun again." Or the evening I went out to dinner with friends and didn't feel the need to hide behind excuses. I joined the laughter. I shared stories. I was present again. Even my daughter, who rarely let her guard down, wrapped her arms around me one night and whispered, "Dad, you're back. I've missed this version of you." And maybe the moment that touched me most was sitting in my doctor's office, watching his eyebrows rise as he scanned my chart. He looked at me, almost in disbelief. These results, they're excellent. Whatever you've been doing, it's working. I smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of gratitude. Because I knew the truth. It wasn't about some miracle cure. It was about choosing differently, living differently, believing that my story wasn't over yet. The black sesame oil had opened the door, but the real gift was what followed. The walks, the better food, the deeper rest, the hope that grew stronger with each passing day. I felt alive again, not just surviving, not just existing, but living. There was a time I thought my best days were behind me. That aging meant losing, piece by piece, everything I loved. But now I know the opposite can be true. Aging can also mean gaining wisdom, resilience, gratitude, even strength. And perhaps the most beautiful part of it all is this. I no longer fear the years ahead. I welcome them. Because I know I can walk into them with energy, clarity, and peace. As I sit here today, I can say these words with honesty. I am not the same man who once sat crying over a pair of socks. Now I stand tall, steady, and full of life. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of growing older. In fact, I'm grateful for it. When I look back at where I started, the fear in the doctor's office, the sleepless nights, the shame of not being able to put on my own socks, I realize just how far I've come. And what strikes me most is this. The change didn't come from something complicated. It didn't come from a magic pill or a miracle cure. It came from one small choice, repeated day after day. A teaspoon of oil, a short walk, a better meal, an earlier bedtime. One by one, those choices stacked on top of each other until they became a new life. That's the power of persistence. The power of believing it's not too late. The power of refusing to give up on yourself. I'm not here to tell you it's easy. It's not. There were days I stumbled, days I doubted, days I almost went back to my old ways. But each time I reminded myself of one truth. It's never too late to take care of yourself. And now, I want to turn this back to you. Do you feel your health slipping away? Do you wake up tired, forgetful, or afraid of what the future holds? Have you been told by a doctor that your numbers are heading in the wrong direction? If so, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not alone. I've been there. I've felt the fear, the shame, the exhaustion, but I've also felt the hope, the renewal, the joy of finding myself again. So don't resign yourself to the idea that this is just part of aging. It doesn't have to be. Small changes, simple steps, natural choices, they can make a bigger difference than you imagine. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you struggle with blood sugar, memory, or energy? Share your story in the comments. I promise, someone out there needs to hear it. Have you tried a natural remedy that surprised you with its results? Tell us about it. We can all learn from each other. And if this story touched you, please share it with someone you love. You never know who might need this message of hope today, because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. Not just numbers on a chart, but life. Real life, full of moments, full of laughter, full of love. So don't give up. Don't wait. Don't believe the lie that it's too late. Your story isn't over. In fact, it might just be beginning. Take it from me, healing doesn't always come in a hospital or a pharmacy. Sometimes it comes from a teaspoon of oil, a walk in the park, and the courage to keep going. And if I could do it, so can you.